Welcome to A Procurement Podcast, the Reform Rundown, with your hosts Chris Robinson and Fleur Summers.
Over the course of this series, Fleur and I will be discussing some of the main themes and concepts surrounding the Procurement Act 2023 and what it will mean to the public sector ahead of launch. Fleur and I have a combined 40 years public sector procurement experience and will be using some of that experience to share our knowledge and insights around the Act itself.
So let's get into today's topic.
Welcome to the fourth episode of the Procurement Podcast, the Reform Rundown. If you in fact have missed any of our previous recordings, be sure to check back on the three that we've done already.
So in today's episode, we are going to jump straight into the topic and have a discussion because it's a bit of a challenging one I think we've chosen here today, isn't it, Chris?
It is.
And certainly something that the sector and suppliers alike will have to get a grip with pretty quickly with the new Procurement Act. And this topic for today is going to be contract management. A bit like social value and sustainability that we discussed in our previous podcast episode, contract management is not a new concept to the public sector. It's one that has been around for quite a while, and it is pretty fundamental given the importance of the continued value for money requirements when protecting the best interests of the public purse throughout the duration of the contract.
So already, Fleur, you've said that this is a huge theme, and I suppose really the best place to start off is from your own personal perspective is, what does contract management mean to you?
So I think for me, and I think this is a common saying that you hear quite a lot around contract management, isn't it? So it's around not just locking a contract in the cupboard once you've awarded it and not look at it again. So contract management is around making sure that you are using your contract, you are making sure that you get your value for money and you get what you wanted from the very original procurement. And you have to use contract management tools and techniques to be able to get that. What about you, Chris? What do you see contract management is? Yeah,
I totally echo everything that you've just mentioned there. And I think one of the things that we're identifying already, having read the Act itself, is that the thought, the mindset of, as you said there, sticking a contract folder within a filing cabinet and only pulling it out when there is an issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This kind of reactive as opposed to proactive
it's almost
approach.
Like I've done that procurement, I'm just going to leave that
on
over
to
there
the next.
now.
and look, you and I appreciate, don't we, given the fact we worked directly within the sector for so many years, that there are real pressures on the sector, isn't there, in terms of resources and actually the volume of procurements that the sector themselves actually have to do. So, this certainly isn't a slight on the sector. You and I work within the sector, and oftentimes it is firefighting. But as we are going to discuss, contract management is something that needs to be managed throughout the life of the contract, and not only when there's a problem either on the horizon or about to appear. But no, simply yes, I echo everything that you just said there. So then, in that case, what do we know from the Act? And by the same token, what do we need to be mindful of when considering the concept of contract management? Now, of course, it goes without saying that key performance indicators and contractual milestones are, again, a massive element within contract management. But moving forward, this certainly seems to have stepped up another level of what is being prescribed within the Act itself. And we will take a deeper dive into KPIs and contractual milestones later on. So then, in terms of contract management, and we started off, I was just a little bit flippant, but from a place of truth, I would suggest, when we're talking about contracts being filed away in cabinets, etc. But when you look at contract management and when you consider what's within the Act now, there are certainly some areas that are mentioned that are clearly apparent as areas to focus on within contract management in that particular space. And in almost in no particular order here, take, for example, innovation. Okay. How do you build innovation into contracts and then subsequently as part of a contract management technique?
I think it's around having that ability to bring in new technology, isn't it? Having those discussions as part of your contract meetings and seeing what they're, we're not necessarily going to know everything that's happening in all different markets or the market that contract is in. And it's using that information and seeing where you could potentially bring that in and incorporate it in if it's going to be of benefit to your contract and how it's being delivered.
Definitely. Innovation, you immediately start thinking about future-proofing
new
the contracts.
Technologies, all those type of things.
Absolutely. The embracement of new technology. And I think it'd be remiss of both you and I not to mention, the acronym that frightens certainly me to death because I'm a technological dinosaur. And Fleur, you'd certainly vouch for that, wouldn't you? That acronym is AI, artificial intelligence. So
not something that we're going to get into a lot in this podcast, but it is something that is around, isn't it?
Definitely. And again, as you say, a consideration as part of the wider future proofing within the innovation space. Okay. So a more perhaps maybe common area of contract management, certainly within the public sector, given by way of the nature in which public sector organisations work with their suppliers, and should be credited for it as well, is around supplier relationship management. So again, Fleur, factor that into a contract management space.
So supplier relationship management, obviously that's a key area, isn't it? And it's understanding how both parties see each other, isn't it? I think with both in terms of SIPs, you can always think of that 4-box matrix and what's it,
the dreaded Kraujic, absolutely.
And then understanding what that means and how you want to work together, and just having those conversations and being open and working together. It's all those sort of principles, isn't it?
Definitely. And you touch on a very valid point there, and we said it in jest when you think about the Kraujic matrices there, and those of you that are familiar with the SIPS qualification as well, of course, is that what we are reading, what we've seen in the Act itself, contract management and the supplier relationship management piece doesn't necessarily mean that you have to invest 24/7 all your
into
efforts.
Everything. No,
exactly.
Not at all.
So a lot of this, again, is around the careful selection as a public procuring organisation of the amount of time and effort that is worthwhile to invest in that relationship with the supplier, dependent upon
certain things like value, importance, reputation, political interest. I don't know. There's loads of different areas that you can look into to determine which ones to focus on.
For sure. So that's the supplier relationship management area, if you will, and then consider partnership working. And when you look at partnership working, and certainly I am seeing now from within the sector, and then when I work directly within the sector, seeing a lot of longer term contracts being awarded, strategic, critical. There we are. Back to the Kraujic. Absolutely. And the longer term working relationships by way of development of alliances and co-destiny and partnership working. Again, dependent upon the nature of the product or service that's being procured. It's selecting the right approach, isn't it?
Definitely,
that's what it's all about there. And how about our old favourite, achieving value for money, VFM?
That's why you have contract management, isn't it? To make sure you are achieving value for money throughout the life of your contract and what you set out to achieve at the very beginning.
And then you think about the current economic climate, and don't want to get too depressing and down.
Not on this
podcast. No, we don't do that on these podcasts. But you only have to consider the economic climate right now, and of course, as has always been the case, it's an incredibly important feature of contract management value for money, but even more so today in today's environment than ever. And then just thinking about perhaps maybe one more there, incentivization. I don't know about you, Fleur, but when I think about previously working within the public sector, and we were considering incentivization, rightly or wrongly, we almost used to use contract extension opportunities.
Incentives,
as an incentive.
Definitely.
But it's much more than that, isn't it?
It is definitely more than that. And looking at extra benefits that it can bring, but it's definitely more than what you in terms of just contract extensions.
Okay, then that's fine then. So, a question for you then. Okay,
full of questions.
I do. I say I apologise for it. I don't really, but resourcing for contract management, important, yes.
Very.
Okay, but why? I suppose is my question.
So I think if you take it in terms of the Procurement Act sort of focus or lens that we're sort of looking at in these podcasts, obviously from everything that we've seen in terms of, and we'll get a bit more into KPIs, but there's going to be such more of a focus on it, isn't it? You're going to have a lot more contract management to be able to make sure you're doing managing your KPIs, publishing your KPIs. There needs to be contract management layer introduced. But, and as with other areas that we've talked about, the public sector organisations, you will find some that already have that in place, managing contracts in a way that they are. And they don't need to, this won't be too much extra for them, but there will be some, they're on the other end sort of a scale where it's not necessarily something that they have done much of. It might be decentralised or contract management's done elsewhere. And there's going to be resource issues, isn't there, in terms of being able to, how are they going to do it? How are they going to do, what contract management process are they going to have?
Yes. Who's
going to resource that? How is it all going to work? And that's quite a lot to try and sort out in terms of the Act.
What's quite interesting about that, actually, Fleur, is when you consider contract management, is that, I think traditionally the viewpoint has been is contract management is undertaken by the procurement department itself. And that's certainly been my experience within the sector. When you think about some of those areas that we've talked about earlier on, innovation being one in particular, I would suggest that there will be a greater emphasis, and rightly so, on the functional department for which the procurement exercise is being undertaken on behalf of, to actually have a more greater involvement
in contract management,
for sure, rather than it being left to procurement to, dare I say, look to oversee performance managed suppliers over themes that actually they're not particularly knowledgeable or comfortable within.
Yeah.
So, as we talked about then, so a key change that we have seen upon our review of the Act itself is key performance indicators and contractual milestones.
This is a big change.
It is.
This is a big change.
It is. And it's very clear, isn't it, in terms of the Act, of what it is asking or prescribing the sector to actually do. And I know something that, you're always keen to see and pick up on within the Act is how much more transparent.
That's the main thing with the KPIs, isn't it? So, any contracts now, yes, there can be KPIs, but there is no requirement to actually share or publish how they are actually performing. But once we have the Act, there will be that requirement, won't there, in terms of actually showing how suppliers are performing against these KPIs.
Definitely.
Or even publishing the KPIs up front and saying this is how we're going to manage it.
So there's a lot of forward planning involved.
There is going to be a lot of forward planning.
Yeah, definitely. So what do we know then? So the Act itself has mandated that any public sector procurement activity, either equal to 5 million or in excess of 5 million, must have a minimum of 3 key performance indicators. Now, that might not seem like a lot, okay?
But for some it could be.
Yeah, for sure. And that there is being mandated. And then I think is always the question, what is the correct amount of KPIs to have in a contract?
That's always the question, isn't it?
It is. And okay, we've already referenced SIPs on this podcast already, but we'll use another principle of SIPs, and a common principle used within the SIPs qualification. That's the SMART objectives.
Yes,
okay?
Definitely using those to set your KPIs.
And I think that's a really useful rule of thumb or yardstick, if you will, in terms of creating those key performance indicators. So yet again, procurement exercises equal to or in excess of £5 million must have a minimum of 3 key performance indicators within them. And again, we are procurement people. Myself and Fleur are procurement professionals. We're not legal experts, but you and I both know, and it's a given, and a message in particular to the public sector procuring organisations here is that key performance indicators, in order to be legally enforceable within a contract itself, have to be agreed by both parties to the contract.
Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
So this isn't necessarily going to be a one-way street for the public procuring bodies to actually say, these are the KPIs that we're putting forward to you, and this is what you are going to have to adhere to under the life of the contract itself. So that's key to remember. And actually, Fleur, you think about the supplier relationship management piece that we talked about earlier on.
Yeah.
Again, greater importance of
KPIs
having that.
KPIs are going to be a massive importance.
Absolutely.
And I think another area in terms of the Procurement Act that we'll see is obviously this central contract register that we're going to hopefully see in terms of where all the performance information around these KPIs that are going to have to be published. It's still information that we're yet to see in terms of how it's going to be or what information needs to be published. But it sounds like there is going to be this one central register for all information. that's going to come from like information such as the new contracts details notice,
yes.
or obviously the new KPI annual performance notice that is going to have to be published.
Sure. And this here really, I would suggest, in terms of the KPIs, the reporting, the so-called central contracts register itself, whilst we're yet to see what that looks like by way of a template. What I would certainly hope for the public sector procuring organisations is that it will give them greater comfort in instances where suppliers have perhaps maybe repeat offended or failed to meet key performance indicators, because that detail and the outcomes of which on an annual basis will be reported on within this contract register, give them greater confidence to actually seek to potentially, even terminate contract arrangements. Now that's something
that is definite.
But that's something that you and I, as previous public
it's always a question, isn't it?
It is, and there's a nervousness around that. But by having that register there that's publicly available for the world to see, it should give them that confidence.
Definitely. Needless to say, this is an area of real focus and importance. And as ever, we'd be keen to hear what you, the listener, and your thoughts are in terms of what we've discussed today. So don't forget to share these with us in the comments section in terms of our podcast.
And I think that's pretty much all we've got time for today's podcast. And as ever, I think we've covered a lot of ground there in a relatively short space of time. But thank you for listening to our podcast. If there are any topics again that you would like myself and Fleur to cover in future episodes, please let us know. And for now, we'll catch you on the next one.
See you then.